Greetings, my friends. Jason Archer here with episode 3 of Dogs WOD Radio. I'm joined by Scott Porter, and today we have a special guest newcomer, Kirk Morales. And I thought we'd start the show by letting Kirk talk a little bit about his background and his history with the sport of Olympic lifting as well as CrossFit.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, guys. Thanks for having me on. My background is kind of varied. I've done a little bit of everything. I started like with traditional baseball mostly as a kid, especially growing up on the East Coast. That's pretty much the sport of choice for most people. I did boxing for about 3 years, and then I started getting into CrossFit through a friend of mine I knew out of California. CrossFit RxD. They were actually in regionals. I saw them last weekend. So I started doing CrossFit. It was pretty weak when I got into it. My endurance was awesome because having come from boxing, I was pretty much just pummeling through the WODs, but I had zero strength. So when it came to doing any sort of lifting, any sort of like any heavy weights and WODs, it would just absolutely destroy me. So I decided like, hey, I need to get stronger.
Yeah.
So I started doing more squatting on my own, more Olympic lifting, and just kind of fell in love with the Olympic lifts. So I switched to that. Been doing that for probably the last 2 years now, just solid. I'll do CrossFit here and there just to try to stay in shape because Olympic lifting combined with the wrong diet can definitely make you a little bit bigger, and I wasn't definitely having that. So yeah, I do a little CrossFit for conditioning, but Olympic lifting is really where my passion's at.
Right.
Both competing and coaching. I am a certified CrossFit coach as well, so I've coached CrossFit, I coach Olympic lifting, and yeah, that's pretty much the high level of my background.
Yeah, I think a lot of people may not realize this, but I think you and I started CrossFit about the same time at the same box.
Yeah.
And I remember when I first met you, you were this skinny little dude. Well, I mean, you were always the same height, obviously, but you were skinny, man. You're ripped.
Yeah, it was about 30 pounds ago.
Yeah, for sure. You haven't been missing the buttered biscuits lately, huh?
No, they're delicious.
Yeah, and Kirk's real humble. I mean, here's a guy who competes in is it 105 kilo or
94 now.
94 kilo,
Yeah.
and snatches. I don't know my kilos very well, but I believe like 110, 115 kilos all time.
Yeah.
So I mean that's 240, 250. So you probably wouldn't look at him today and go, oh yeah, this guy started in CrossFit.
Yeah.
Because he specializes in the Olympic weightlifting. And he's made that transition, and he's done fairly well at it. So we're happy to have Kirk on the show today.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And hopefully we can get him back repeatedly, and he'll end up joining us and adding an extra element to the show. So welcome to Kirk. And so jumping right in. So this week was a big week for the CrossFit community in terms of the interwebs.
Yeah.
Yeah, Scott, you turned me on to a little article that raised a few eyebrows.
Yeah, I
about
mean,
500,000 eyebrows.
I know last week we wanted to get into kind of the the ignorance towards CrossFit that's kind of you see out there, and just a general, I guess, population. You see it on social media, and then sure enough, like 2 days later after we recorded the last episode, this article surfaces and starts getting shared all over Facebook and everything else, and there's been lots of articles in the past, but this one seemed to get a lot of buzz right off the bat. And so the article is Why I Don't Do CrossFit by Aaron Simmons. And then you saw, obviously the title is going to get your attention. So
sure.
It seems to kind of be a popular thing these days. It's just to come out with a catchy title and then a controversial piece to draw a bunch of hits to your website or get a fan base on Instagram or whatever it is. And the article then has created a lot of backlash within the CrossFit community, but then I've gotten into a few discussions on Facebook back and forth with some people that are real anti-CrossFit, and they like to share this article and get everybody to say, oh, read this article, CrossFit's bad for you. And but there's been some good responses out there too, so I think we should we can have some good discussion today about that article.
Yeah, so she talks a little bit about, she goes into the form aspect, people dropping form. She goes into the fact that you can get certified in a weekend to be a CrossFit trainer. She goes into kipping pull-ups and how she'll never do kipping pull-ups, how she'll never do deadlifts, she'll never do kettlebells. I mean, just on and on and on, and claiming that all these things are detrimental to your body. One of the things that stood out to me was just the deadlift aspect. I'm like, what does this lady do, going through everyday life?
Well, it wasn't even high rep deadlifts that she was complaining about. It was just deadlifts in general.
Exactly.
Which isn't even a CrossFit specific movement.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I always have a problem when people come out and inherit just this exercise is inherently dangerous.
Right.
Is what she's saying with deadlifts, and taking their own personal experience and applying it towards everybody.
Totally.
Right.
So just like Kirk said, it's not high rep deadlifts that are dangerous. It's not max deadlifts that are dangerous. It's just don't do deadlifts. Don't pick up anything off the ground, essentially. Which, I mean, we all know that you do that every day, in some kind of setting, and especially in the gym. I mean, if you put the dumbbells on the ground, how do you pick them back up?
Yeah.
You deadlift them.
Yeah. Well,
how do you start it clean?
Totally.
I mean, it's the same thing. You're picking weight off the ground.
Yeah. Well, when I read that little bit about deadlifts, I could just imagine your face turning red because that's your baby right there.
That's where I just was like, okay, this girl doesn't know what she's talking about.
Well, and the funny thing is,
I almost didn't read the rest of the article.
Yeah, it's in like the second paragraph.
Yes. Why read anything else? It's like, deadlifts are dangerous. Okay, next. I'm not going to read the rest of that.
Yeah. Well, she goes on and on about what CrossFit is and isn't, and I think she sort of paints it as to be just a group of people who are cultish about pushing their bodies beyond, the recommended daily allowance of, exercise, if you will, if there is such a thing. And she attacks these movements as if they're not used in all forms of lifting or all forms of training. And it's kind of nice to have Kirk here today because obviously his specialty being Olympic lifting, with her going off so deep on the high rep Oli lifting, it'd be nice to get his opinion on that, see what he thinks.
Yeah, so I think there are a few different elements to that. I don't like doing high rep stuff personally, just because I enjoy doing one lift and then resting a lot, maybe having a snack in between. But I don't really see anything wrong with it as long as it's done properly. And I think a lot of it comes back to, first and foremost, the coaching. Having someone that's watching your form and correcting your form. But on top of that, the biggest thing that I personally see with people doing high rep Olympic movements that I think really leads to these negative connotations is the fact that they're not conscious of their form after the first rep. So if you're doing high rep snatches, your first snatch may be great, your second snatch may be okay, but at that point, once you start getting into that touch and go mentality, you're no longer thinking about setting up properly for the next rep. Maybe it's because you're not thinking about it at all. Maybe it's because you're trying to be faster, and resetting can be a little bit slower. But at the end of the day, if you take time to properly reset at the end of each rep, you may slow down a little bit, but I think you're ultimately going to be able to do more reps because your body's not going to break down as fast. So I would prefer to coach an athlete through slower reps, resetting. I mean, in my classes, we never do touch and go. You're always resetting in between each rep to learn what it's like to get back into that start position before you start the next rep. And then once you get comfortable with that, you can do it a lot faster. And you're still technically doing touch and goes, but there's a little reset in between, which is saving your body.
Sure. So what's your opinion of a couple of these CrossFit WODs that have the 30 rep snatch, or 30 rep ground overhead, if you will, or clean and jerk, where you do see people breaking down big time trying to get these scores at around 135 pounds.
I think so. There are some top level athletes even that you see break down if you're really paying close attention to their form. I think some of that comes down to just knowing your body. If you know that you have a strong, durable back, and you don't want to, you want to start using your back towards the end because it's faster, and you don't have to worry about bending your knees and taking that extra time at the bottom, then fine, go for it. I mean, everyone's built a little bit differently, but for a majority of especially newer athletes who may not have that strength, may not really know what they're capable of doing, I think that's really where it gets dangerous.
Yeah, it was interesting in reading the article, and I think Scott might have mentioned this the other day when we were talking. She goes through and she states sort of with a blanket statement that certain things are meant to be a certain way. For example, she says Olympic and power lifts are not meant to be done in sets of 30 for time. They are extremely technique oriented and are meant to be explosive and powerful over very short periods of time with plenty of rest. Well, I think that's traditionally true. However, I don't think that there was ever any limitation placed on those motions by anyone who's ever done them.
It's the context of the sport. So in the
Exactly.
sport of Olympic weightlifting, she's absolutely right. You're not meant to do that many reps. You're never going to see that many reps in a training session without some length of rest in between. But in the context of CrossFit, it's perfectly fine. So maybe that's what she's referring to. But that holds true for so many other movements. I mean, getting back to deadlifts again, right? In the sport of powerlifting, the high rep deadlifts really aren't a thing. You're going for explosion and power and max effort in one lift. But you transition into CrossFit again, and high rep is the norm. Granted, not at the same load that you get in some of these other sports, but I think it's all just comes down to the context of whatever movement you're performing.
Yeah, I totally agree with Kirk. And the one thing I want to point out is if you've noticed that she's gone back and actually edited the article.
Oh, no, I didn't notice that.
Yeah, so basically she got called out by a bunch of people, including Russell Berger of CrossFit, and he just tore her apart, along with other people. I know Lift Big, Eat Big put out a response, and there's definitely some good responses, but she went back and actually edited her original article. And so in the first article, it didn't say Olympic and power lifts. It actually says it combines that, because she doesn't know what they are. Okay, let's put that out there. She has no idea what they are. She calls it Olympic powerlifting.
Okay.
And then she actually made a response, either it was on her Instagram or a blog that I read the other day, as saying that she didn't know the difference between Olympic lifting and powerlifting until today, when someone told her.
Sure.
So she's openly admitting that she has no authority to even write this article.
Right.
I'm sorry, but if you don't know what Olympic lifting is and you don't know what powerlifting is, you have no
Right.
authority.
How can you say how lifts are supposed to be done and what
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, she's basically gathering just different information and just saying, oh, they're not meant to be done for 30 reps. Well, just like Kirk said, just because it hasn't been done before doesn't mean that all of a sudden 30 is going to kill you. I mean, it's going to be dangerous. I mean, and you have to look at it as what kind of percentage of maximum are you using on this 30 rep, for time. If it's such a low percentage, I will come out and say that I think that you could maintain good form throughout, especially if you're an advanced athlete.
Absolutely.
Now, if you're using 90% of your max and you're trying to do 30 for time, I mean, chances are you're going to get slowed down anyway because the weight's so heavy.
Sure.
But there's nobody out there that's doing should be doing 90% of their max for 30 as fast as possible.
Right.
Well, if you
So-
can, it's not 90% of your max.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just not 90%. So
Freak.
Grace, 30 reps, clean and jerk. Isabel, 30 snatches. If you're doing a high percentage of your max, it's taking you so long, then yeah, I mean, I would agree. There's no point to do that. You'd be better off scaling the weight way down and using, something like 50% of your max, and then, or even working the technique. And it all comes back to coaching, like Kirk said. Like any sport. If you're competing, if you're doing CrossFit to compete in a sport, then you need to train like an athlete would train.
Sure.
And you need to develop the techniques and the skills and the fundamentals before you start advancing and trying to advance in the sport. So CrossFit has, methodology where they say mechanics and then consistency and then intensity. And you learn that in your level 1 weekend seminar certification. So we can get into that whole discussion about, getting certified over the weekend, then all of a sudden you're an expert. But, they make a lot of good points over this weekend. And whether someone goes out and irresponsibly makes someone with no experience to snatch 30 reps for time is, for as fast as possible, and they've never done snatch before, or they obviously don't have good technique, even though the philosophy of CrossFit is mechanics, consistency, intensity, and they come right out and say that, that's not CrossFit being dangerous. That's that coach being dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And that's going to happen at, that happens, first of all, it happens every day at the corporate gym setting with personal trainers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're getting their clients to do absolutely ridiculous things, not to mention they're putting them on machines, doing 3 sets of 15, and wasting their time and their money.
Sure.
So, I mean, that brings in a whole nother discussion, but it got me started.
It's wound up this morning.
But, yeah,
that deadlift comment must have really hit hard.
This is a good topic, and I just think, like Kirk said, it comes back to coaching, and Kirk's a coach here at Spartan Fit CrossFit, and he coaches the Olympic weightlifting classes, and all of our members that want to learn the Olympic lifts and want to get more proficient at those, they're going to take his class and they're going to learn the skill.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to learn the skill, and then all of our other coaches that coach the regular classes, we certainly aren't having people doing grace as fast as possible if their form gets bad. Now, there is some responsibility on the athlete too, because some people just don't listen.
Yeah.
It's just like any sport.
A lot of it's ego too, right? You're an athlete, you're coming in, this is new, this is fun, and I want to see how much weight I can do.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, it's up to the coach to say, no, your form's terrible, take the weight off, let's do it with just the bar or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting to talk about the Olympic lifts at the highest level, and I don't know if you guys have seen the videos of Froning going against Klokov on the snatch, which basically was the Isabel workout, I believe, right? 30 snatches.
It was Isabel, but it was 225 pounds.
Yeah, it was
So I was
225.
just going to make that point. So you've got a CrossFitter, Rich Froning, obviously arguably one of the best CrossFitters in the world, or the best CrossFitter in the world, putting 225 on the bar and doing Isabel, which is 30 snatches for time, I think in around 6 minutes or so, 6 or 7 minutes, something like that. Klokov catches wind of the video and decides he's going to do it. And for those of you who don't follow Olympic lifting, Klokov is just a beast.
Yeah, he's an alien.
Yeah, the guy is just strong beyond belief. And so we see him attempt the Isabel at 225 on the first attempt, and we see his form break well before Froning. And actually, Froning looked good start to finish.
Yep.
Froning, if you watch Froning on any workout, though,
Yeah.
every repetition looks the same.
Yeah.
14.5, every burpee, every thruster looks the same. And just like you said, on Isabel at 225, he squat snatched, I think, every single rep, and had kind of a method to do it, like one every 10 seconds or so. And, he got, like you said, he got done in about 6 minutes.
Right.
And that's I think part of that is the type of training that Froning does is he trains for consistency at high repetitions, because that's what the sport of CrossFit calls for.
Sure.
Whereas you look at Klokov, who trains for single reps, and when you give him a workout with 30 reps, he's not training. He doesn't normally train for consistency at that period. So it just has to do with, again, context of what you're doing in the sport that you're specialized in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so in a sense, even though Klokov is an advanced elite Olympic weightlifter who can snatch, what did he snatch? Probably 400?
Yeah, it's about 400. Sure.
Yeah, and I know he's push pressed 500, and he's 100.
This is 50%.
Yeah,
weight.
So 225 is like roughly maybe 55%
Right.
of his max. Well, he did power snatch most of them, if not all. And so even though he comes from that elite weightlifting, he's now working at a higher repetition range that he's way higher than he's normally used to.
Right.
And in a sense, he's almost a beginner for that workout, right? He's obviously insanely strong, but I bet you his respiration rate was jacked.
Oh, yeah.
And his heart rate was jacked.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden now it's like, okay, you can't breathe, and your pulse is jacked, blood pressure is probably high, and so now the form does start to break down. So in a sense, he is a beginner, he's just insanely strong.
Well, he even missed a rep.
Yeah, so he actually he missed more than one.
To see a guy like that miss a rep at one of his warm-up weights is,
Well, and too, Kirk, you've done Isabel.
Oh, yeah.
And 135 is, that's probably, at RX weight, 135 is about 55% of your max.
Yeah.
And what happened?
Oh, yeah. Rep 9, I was dying.
It was out of breath. Now, would you say that doing 30 reps for time is inherently dangerous?
No, absolutely not.
So it's an individual thing.
Absolutely. And again, it's knowing your body. It's knowing. So for me, I know that I really have to focus on my form doing Isabel, because if that's all I have, right? I don't have the conditioning. I don't have the lung capacity for that. So I have to have perfect form on every rep.
Mm-hmm.
So once I feel myself starting to tire out, I will stop and pace myself and make sure that if I'm going to attempt that weight, that next rep, that it's going to be as good of a form as possible.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, and that brings up an interesting point, because in the article she touches on not only the form, but she talks about conditioning and that sort of thing as well. And I thought it was interesting in that scenario. And for those of you guys who haven't seen these videos, just go out to YouTube and search, Froning 225 Isabel, Klokov 225 Isabel, what have you. It's there online. But basically, you can see an elite, world class Olympic lifter like Klokov. The guy squats 600 plus, and you see him on his final reps at Isabel struggling to stand the weight up. That's the type of thing we're talking about. So when you compare that to Froning's performance, granted he's obviously been training for this much longer than Klokov, but you would think a man whose squat at 225 is well below, less than his 50% by far. In this time domain, you see him completely break down and fail a few reps, as you guys mentioned.
Yeah, and I think Klokov actually came back and he's done the workout again, and he did it at 105 kilos, so he actually did it a little bit heavier.
Okay.
And he took like a minute off his time.
Yep.
So he did it, and Annie Thorstadter was next to him, I believe, and he looked a little bit better. So, the guy's a specimen, obviously, so not many people can take a minute off their heavy Isabel time in a couple of months or whatever it was, but to see him miss some of those lifts that when the weight is just a feather to him, it does make a statement. But I definitely agree with Kirk. I think it's an individual type thing where, I don't think high rep Olympic lifting is inherently dangerous. I think you have to be responsible and know your own limitations and your strengths and your weaknesses. And, if you feel like your form is starting to break down, you just slow it down.
Or know how to adapt.
Absolutely.
So I did 14.1, snatches and double unders, and it was miserable for me. But I knew that towards the end I could break form because my back and my traps could handle it. So I was muscle snatching towards the end because that's really all I could do. That's all my body was capable of. But I knew that I wouldn't get hurt doing that.
Right. Exactly.
And that's also 75 pounds. For people that don't know, 14.1, it was a power snatch and 15 reps of 75 pounds for the guys, and 30 double unders for 10 minutes. So it's light. So to come out and say high rep Olympic lifting, which that is an Olympic lift, it's a power snatch, and now most people that had big scores were doing a muscle snatch because it's quicker, faster cycle time. I just don't see how you could say, well, that's just bad. That's dangerous. Because you can keep pretty good form on that. Especially if you're conditioned to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's how you train. No, don't take, Jane off the street who's never done a power snatch and say, go as fast as possible, don't worry about your form.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just bad coaching.
Totally, and to your point, there are very few exercise motions that you can do that are inherently dangerous. If you think about the human body, we all have 2 arms, 2 legs, right? We're working with a barbell or dumbbell. There's only a certain amount of ways that the body can move in the first place. So if you look at, some of the highest level of, let's say, 14.1, use that as an example, right? Very few people probably kept a completely flat back on that workout as they were doing it.
Yep.
Very few people sacrificed their score to maintain a flat back. They probably curled at the end. Just like you'll see a high level deadlifter or power lifter, he might fish hook his back a little bit, when he's going for his max, right? But he knows what he's capable of. So at the end of the day, risk is just a function of knowledge. It's a function of what you know that you're capable of. And as an athlete, you have to be responsible and say, you know what, if this is not something your body can handle, or you feel uncomfortable about this, you just need to step back and say, that's not for me, whether it's the coach pushing you or not. And there's a certain element of individual responsibility that comes in there, I think.
Definitely. And I think most people would agree either in the sport of CrossFit or even outside of CrossFit that, work with athletes that, all sports can be dangerous to an extent. And CrossFit is no different. I wouldn't go out and say CrossFit is dangerous, don't do it. And because you can let's look at the facts here. And if you look at and I've spent some time on online stuff, and you look up which sports cause the most amount of injuries. Okay, and I mean obviously CrossFit is so new, and there's not a ton of people doing it, but you can at least look at the percentage of injuries that's causing per person that's participating. So if you look at that, your basketball is going to be up there. Okay, football is going to be up there. Well, let's leave football out because it's a contact sport, and basketball is somewhat contact, but basketball. You know which one is up there, which I thought was interesting, is bicycling.
Really?
Here's a non-contact sport that causes a ton of injuries, ton. And then obviously gymnastics, cheerleading, soccer, and soccer is somewhat of a contact sport. I would say it is, just lesser than football, but you have all these sports that are causing all these injuries, all over the world. And I've yet to see all these anti-soccer and anti-football, anti-basketball articles coming up online and saying that it's just dangerous. Don't partake in this sport. Who's going to take their kid out of football, even though Johnny on a different team
twisted his ankle?
Well, it could be even worse.
Right.
I mean, there's kids. I mean, it's sad, but there's kids out there that die from heat-related illnesses in football, all kinds of injuries.
Well, I mean,
and you're just like, oh, that's not going to happen to my kid, and they leave them in the sport.
You can go down even more basic than that. Take something like running, right? And you have these marathon runners who end up being injured over the years because they're putting so much pressure through their knees. What do you start telling people not to run? I mean, I personally would start an anti-running campaign.
I will join that campaign. I will join. I'm not a big runner. Yeah, I will. I'm in on that.
Yeah, it just seems like in today's culture, there's this sort of mental bend toward everything has to be safe.
Yeah.
And that's just not reality, right? When's the last time you saw an anti-logger campaign?
Yeah.
The most dangerous profession in the world is logging. More fatalities per capita, logging, right? Police aren't even in the top 10, right? But you never hear anybody talking about logging. Right, so where is this coming from? Who is this person to tell me what's safe and wasn't safe? How does she know what my knowledge is or what my body can handle? Right, and if everything that she said were true at this point, there's really no point in us trying to do anything. According to her, all human potential has been predefined, and there's no point in pushing yourself any further.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, for each one person you show me who's had an injury in CrossFit, I'll show you 1,000 that have made a life-changing difference in.
Exactly.
So,
absolutely.
I mean, that's how cultish CrossFit is, but that's how when you talk to people that are just absolutely in love with CrossFit, it's made a life change, with them, their family, friends. And I mean, that's why we're so outspoken about it. But yeah, you're always going to have 2 or 3, injuries per, X amount of participants. And one statistic I read today was, and I love this analogy because I actually thought about this a few years ago. I got invited to go skiing, snow skiing, and I hadn't skied in probably 10 years. And I was like, okay, this is gonna be challenging because I have bad knees. But I'm like, okay, I think I can do it. So I don't think I had to be seeing a video on how to ski. I don't think I had any coaching that I had to go through. You just show up, you pay the fee, here's your skis, sign this little thing, maybe a waiver, I can't remember, this is 4 years ago, and then off you go.
Right.
Okay, and so I go down the first slope, and I figure out that I'm not very good at turning, so I'm just going to go straight down the hill. So I think by the end I had to be going like 50 miles an hour. And the thought is going through my head, like I could die at any point. There's trees all around me. If I make one bad turn, I'm going right into that tree.
Right.
And it's crazy because you don't have to you just show up. And there's people out there and unfortunately it happens to people. They go skiing and you hear about these people that die on skiing related accidents.
But then they put the onus then on the skier. Saying,
exactly.
The skier didn't know what he was doing. It's not the sport of skiing. It's not the ski instructor. It was the skier's fault.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Personal responsibility. And if I was smart, I probably would have maybe like taken a lesson or two before I went, up the mountain and skied down. But it's a good parallel, I think.
Yeah,
it's a CrossFit,
totally.
especially because it's an activity that your general population participates in for fun. I don't know if it's leisurely, but it's an activity that you can just go do, and you're having fun, and it's exercise, and you are putting yourself at risk of possibly dying.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, or tearing your ACL, or any kind of fall. There's all kinds of things that could happen to you, and where are all these anti-skiing articles every time someone gets hurt?
Yeah, they don't exist. It's like the anti-motocross people, right? They don't exist either. But yet, the only time I've ever been to the hospital with a serious injury was a punctured lung and busted ribs was on a motorcycle. That didn't happen at a CrossFit gym.
Yeah.
I'm sure I've left more than enough shin skin on the box, doing box jumps than my fair share. But nothing that was going to require hospitalization.
Yeah, it's like I was going back to saying, from an athlete perspective, that whatever it's the sport of strongman, football, basketball, whatever it is, you're assuming the risks versus rewards. You want to win, right?
Yeah.
So you're in a sport, you want to win. You're gonna assume more risk.
Sure.
Now, for the general population, usually they just want to have fun, get fit. Do it with their friends, family. And so I think a lot of the backlash you see out there is CrossFit is unique in the sense that it is a sport, but it's also, gaining a lot of popularity for people that are just working out.
Mm-hmm.
And the argument is that the people that are just wanting to work out, they, your Bill and John that are, midlife, just trying to get a workout, feel good, and working class people, and then they bust their shin on a box, or they tear their ACL and doing CrossFit, or they throw their shoulder out. I think the argument is that CrossFit is causing these injuries, and that regular exercise in the gym, Globo type gyms, is not causing those.
Exactly. Well, when you don't push yourself and you don't take any risks, your chance of being injured is extremely lessened. Let's just be honest, right?
Sure, absolutely.
There's your comfort zone where you live and where you have your existing result, and what you want is outside of that. So chances are you're going to have to, break a few eggs to get to that goal that you say you want to achieve, right? You can't be where you are. You can't do the same thing every day and expect a different result, right? Einstein's definition of insanity, right? You have to do something different. You have to get a little bit uncomfortable. And CrossFit makes people extremely uncomfortable, especially those on the outside looking in.
What about the thousands and thousands of people that are at, the LA Fitnesses, 24-hour Fitnesses, what have you, that are doing the same thing over and over, like you just said, and never getting results?
Right.
Yeah.
Which is worse?
Yeah, they see
the person that gets the results, gets the life-changing experience, and, they may hurt their shoulder once in a while. The percentage is, again, low, but they're assuming the risk of getting hurt for the reward.
Yeah.
The other people are just meaningless going at their workouts and not getting any results, and they don't take any risk, but there's also no reward.
Absolutely. Well, I think it comes down to the desire to achieve results, right?
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that you can say about CrossFit definitively is that there's always a result. It's measurable, right? And I think when Glassman was doing this, originating this and working out of the garage, the first thing that they thought of was how to define fitness. It wasn't let's create a competition. But when you put a number to anything and you're around competitive people, what's going to happen? You're going to naturally evolve that into some form of competition. And then you see the LA Fitnesses or the Globo gyms specifically, you can just pick one. They're all about the same, right? People go in there and there's a low fee, right? So they can pay and they can jump right in there. They see the naturally thin chick with breast implants on the treadmill, and they think that if they do treadmill long enough, that they're magically going to be thin and grow big tits. That's how it works, right? And then it's just complete falsehood, right? It's total. It's this fabrication in your mind of what you think you want to see, and why you think that person achieved what they achieved. 70% of that leaning out is diet anyway. We all know that, right? You're not going to get that at any gym. You're going to get that behind the dinner plate. So let's just touch on, we talked a little bit about coaching and what that would be, or how effective that is or isn't in the CrossFit gym. Let's touch on that in the final few minutes, and I think we have a question we need to answer from a listener.
Yeah,
I know all three of us, right? We've all been to the cert. We've all spent our quote unquote our weekend there, getting certified and paid our money, and that sort of thing. I don't recall ever being told to push someone beyond their comfort zone unless they were ready to do that. I don't recall ever being told that I was a professional trainer at the end of that. What I recall was 9 basic movements and learning proper form on 9 basic movements over the course of 2 days, which I don't think is too much to ask.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the coaching goes, I think it's like any other industry. Let the buyer beware. So there's going to be irresponsible coaching out there, just like there's irresponsible personal trainers at other gyms. So when you go to, you have to be an advocate for yourself and do your own research and maybe go to 2 or 3 different CrossFit gyms and feel it out and ask them questions. You're getting involved in a new activity. But I think something I wanted to throw out there that we were talking about earlier is one thing that I like to say is, as far as partaking in an intense exercise program, is you're either going to see an orthopedic surgeon at some point or a cardiologist, right? So if you're active, you're going to have some kind of orthopedic issue at some point. And if you're not active, you're going to have heart problems. You're going to see a cardiologist. So, I mean, there's people that are sedentary that sit down at a desk all day, don't work out, go to happy hour after, go home, whatever it is, and they have hip replacement when they're 40. So what's causing that? Is sitting down dangerous? Well, that's a huge discussion. I mean, obviously sitting is not healthy, but it's just ridiculous when people come out and make those statements that CrossFit is inherently dangerous when we know that it's the coaching that's leading to this, and there's a personal responsibility.
Yeah. I mean, everyone needs to be an advocate for themselves, as you said, and take responsibility for where they are. I've never been in a class where I felt like I couldn't drop weight or skip an exercise or scale the exercise. I've never had anyone barking in my ear, you have to do this. I've never played victim either. So I think, like you said, it just falls onto the individual. If they're not comfortable, just speak up or step out of the class. It's not a big deal. No one's going to laugh at you. At least that hasn't been my experience.
Yeah, no, and that's not how I do it at Spartan Fit CrossFit. I know that's not how Kirk coaches it either. It's individual.
Yeah, I mean, yesterday is a classic example. I was in Kirk's class, and I'm completely ripped apart from Monday where we did Murph. I still haven't recovered, being in my 40s, getting up there. But, I think the heaviest bar I picked up was 135 pounds, and even then I only picked it up a couple of times the whole day. And I wasn't going to go any heavier just because I understand that I need to rest. I need to get some form of relief on my lower back. My lower back's fried. I wasn't going to push it on cleans. It just wasn't going to happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're a smart athlete, and there are other ones too. I mean, in that same class last night, I had people coming up to me, "Hey, should I stay here? Or should I go up?" That's a great question. Like, first of all, how do you feel? Second of all, let me see what your form's like at the weight that you're at now. And third of all, what are your goals? Do you want to work on technique or do you want to get stronger? Then we'll figure it out. Don't just put more weight on the bar.
Yeah, and you raise an interesting point right there. What are your goals, right? That's really what the job of the coach is to determine. If you have, like, as Scott was saying, someone who's sedentary behind a desk, 6, 8, 10 hours a day, and they step into a CrossFit class at 6:30 p.m. at night, their goals are going to be very different from someone who's working out 3-4 hours a day, wants to go to regionals, wants to go to the games. Their idea of a rest day is a 5,000 meter row. It's a very different set of goals that you're trying to attain, and as a coach, it's up to you, to push that person or direct that person in the right direction for them. And if you see them stepping out of line, ask if they want some feedback and say something to them. If you see their form is dangerous, ask if they want some feedback, say something to them. But at the end of the day, it's not the exercise that's inherently dangerous. It's the individuals and a function of where they are individually and what they want to create.
Yeah, I think like Kirk said, my experience as a coach and owning a CrossFit gym for the last 2 years, and a gym before that for 2 years, is that men typically have the ego problems where they want to put more weight on the bar, and regardless of their technique. And then women, it's how does my form look?
Yeah.
And should I go up? You think I should go up? Considering you just smoked that weight, yeah, I mean, it looks, that looks super easy to you.
Sure.
Oh, and okay, I'll put 2.5s on. They take the small jumps and then want to make sure the technique's good, and then the guys are like, slapping the 45s on. It's like, wait, slow down here. Your technique is not good. So, but a lot of these members, and I'm sure it is, most CrossFit gyms, is obviously they're paying you for the coaching. So they are going to listen to you and take your expertise. So it is it is a lot of responsibility on the coach to come out and say, no, you need to practice at this lighter weight until your technique is good.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think a lot of coaches just think they're babysitters, and they sit there and make sure, tell people what to do and make sure they put the equipment away. But you're right, they don't take the initiative during class to really try to help these athletes that are paying them for help.
Yeah, and that's what it comes down to, is that there are bad coaches out there, unfortunately, and there are people out there that are just irresponsible, and those are the ones you hear about. But you don't hear about all the good ones.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, and to her point, I mean, there are. She makes a point. She's like, well, the only barrier to opening a CrossFit gym is getting your level 1 cert. You have to have someone with level 1 cert. And money, I think she says. And while that's true, I think it's the same pretty much if you want to open any gym. You just need to have some money.
Sure.
Right?
You don't even need a cert, actually. And then trainer, I would argue that the course that CrossFit does for your level 1 is more intensive and more hands-on than any other certification that I've ever taken.
Sure.
So a lot of them is just you pay them a ton of money, $800, which is real similar to CrossFit, and it's an exam. You sit down and you listen to a lecture all day, and then you take an exam. I don't think they actually get out barbells, do they? I mean, I've taken 3 or 4 different certs in 10 years, and there are a couple exceptions, okay, but the vast majority, and the ones that you see people get the quick certification for, and then they're trainers, or they open up their own gym, and now they're certified experts.
Right.
They don't, in the certification, they don't even have to work with barbells and coach technique.
That's right.
But CrossFit is doing that.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone's arguing that you should go for a weekend and learn CrossFit's 9 basic movements, open up a box and call yourself an expert.
Certainly not.
I don't think anyone's arguing for that. I know I certainly am not. And I've never heard anyone argue for that. So I think basically where most people would be coming from, and I myself, from the coaching standpoint, is that's just a baseline. Here's where you are now. This is your baseline. This is by no means your final destination. You need to continue to learn and grow and develop your skills. Learn about kinesiology, learn about fitness, learn about human anatomy. Get in there, get involved, and see how what your training is putting forth is generating the result in the people who are following you, right?
Absolutely.
Just look at the results. If you make it results-based and you start seeing, hey, I'm seeing lots of injuries, you need to stop doing what you're doing. If you're seeing lots of positive results, then you need to keep doing what you're doing, right? The world is just one big feedback mechanism that we all need to pay attention to. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's not, the fact that CrossFit is doing anything improper. I think it could be that some people assume they come out of there maybe with a little bit of ego, and they open up a box and they might say, well, I'm fine for now. And maybe they go 6 months before they, step into another training course. But at no point was I instructed when I was there that this is the end all be all of training.
Yeah, I think we could keep, hammering this subject matter for probably hours.
Oh God, yeah.
But we are going to try to cut this episode a little bit short. I guess it was
a little
kind
bit
of
short, 15 minutes long.
We ran long, but we're going to shorten it now.
Yeah, got a little energy around this one today, huh?
But we got a question from Rob Taylor on the Dogs of WOD Facebook page that we wanted to address. And Rob asked, what are your thoughts on periodization, structured or targeted programming versus the CrossFit notion of constantly varied movements, particularly in regards to developing core strength movements such as squat, deadlift, press, and the Olympic lifts? So if you don't know, CrossFit preaches, high intensity, functional movements, constantly varied. And I think where people go wrong when they hear constantly varied is they think random.
Mm-hmm.
They think it's random, and they think you're just pulling exercises out of a hat, and you're like, okay, it's Monday, I'm gonna do this, okay, kettlebells, and then I'm gonna do this, and that I would say that is random.
Mm-hmm.
But let me hear your thoughts, Kirk, on what you distinguish between constantly varied and then random.
Sure. So I think CrossFit does have a little bit of both, and I think it comes down to CrossFit is trying to prepare you for the random, in that you should be able to pick something out of a hopper, and you should be able to do it, whether it's a 5K run or whether it's a heavy deadlift or some row or what have you.
Sure.
But in terms of day in day out programming and what you're doing, I'd say, like we were talking about before, it goes back to first, what are your goals and what level are you at? If you're a new athlete, I would personally stay away from the constantly varied side and stick with just core functional movements. Let's make sure you're squatting properly. Let's make sure you're pressing. Let's work on like basic gymnastic movements, just to make sure that you're safe. Then once you get to the level where you can do those movements consistently, and maybe you want to start getting stronger, so now you start adding weight to those movements. And then as you progress, then I think it's more appropriate to start getting into the constantly varied, where you're doing different movements at different times and different modalities at different loads, because you've built up the consistency to where you can now do that safely.
Absolutely.
So it's not a direct answer to this question, but again, a lot of this, there's no one right answer, just like you can't inherently say that deadlifts are bad.
Right.
It really comes down to the athlete and where they're at and what their goals are.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, and I think unfortunately there are people out there that do randomly program for their CrossFit box, or even for themselves. Most people that I've seen in the corporate setting is they're dividing their training based on body parts, and they're going to do what they like to do.
Sure.
So certainly that's not random. CrossFit, with the constantly varied and being prepared for the unknown, now there are people out there that, like I said, are randomly programming and either borrowing somebody else's workout of the day and then just using that, despite what they did yesterday, despite what they did the day before. So good example is we did Murph on Monday, and Murph is a mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 squats, mile run. Well, I guarantee I would have had a lot of backlash if the next day I was like, hey guys, we're running today. Or, hey, we're doing pull-ups again.
Right.
That would be random, right? I would pull it out of the hat and I happen to draw pull-ups. I don't really think that would be effective, for a long-term perspective. And you can prepare for constantly varied, you can prepare for the unknown by having some structure to your program.
I agree.
The constantly varied aspect, and this is Rob's asking about periodization and structured or targeted programming, where I see constantly varied is mixing the different modalities together. So you may have a weightlifting movement, and then you may have a gymnastics movement, and you do some of those workouts, and you do different time domains. You work in short time domains, you work in medium, you work in long, and you mix those so it's varying it, so that you are prepared for the unknown. So when you have a workout come up where it's running and deadlifting, or it's handstand push-ups and power cleans, or it's rowing and then squatting, you've mixed those modalities before in your training, you've varied your training, you've covered different time domains so that you are prepared for an unknown type setting like that.
Sure. And I think going even deeper too, it's being smart enough to program different versions of the same type of movement. So we'll do handstand push-ups some days, and then other days we'll do strict handstand push-ups, so you try not to kip. And I think that holds true with any sport. I mean, even with Olympic weightlifting, two main lifts are snatch and clean and jerk, but you're not doing full snatches every day. You're not even doing snatches from the ground every day. You vary it so that, to help improve whatever that core movement is, and the same holds true with CrossFit. And whether it's varied by modality or time, or partial movements or what have you. I think Scott, is absolutely right in that you're trying to mix them enough so that if and when something random comes up or something unexpected comes up, it's not completely alien to you.
Right, of course.
And you see that at regionals this year, and you see a lot of people struggling, like we were talking about last week with Sam Briggs, struggling on the handstand walk, and you see a number of athletes struggling on the strict handstand push-ups, even missing out on the games because they didn't work that in their training, right? They didn't vary enough their training. Maybe they just worked on strength. They thought the regionals were going to be super heavy, and they worked on their full snatches, and they worked on their cleans, and they didn't work on some of those gymnastics movements.
Yeah.
So and that's where I see constantly vary versus random.
Oh, totally. Big difference. I mean, I think when I'm in a box and I've been through the programming for a few weeks, I can tell you straight off the bat if it's structured, as Rob's asking, or if it's just random, right? Because you'll know if you'll hit the same body parts 2-3 days in a row that somebody's messing something up. You're not going to do deadlift,
right?
3 days in a row. It's not going to happen. You're going to throw some squats in there. You're going to mix up the different areas that you're going to work. And there's nothing random about that. It's actually structured, but it might seem random in that it's mixed in terms of load, like you were saying, or rep scheme, like you guys were saying, right? Nothing random about that.
Right. And I hope that helped answer your question, Rob, if you're tuning in. And I think we could definitely go into more about that. Maybe next week we'll talk a little bit more about, at least how I feel, and maybe we'll have Kirk back too, and talk about the programming for CrossFit, and talk about it on this as far as the competitor side versus just your general population side. And then maybe we'll get into the controversial kipping pull-ups.
We'll set aside another 4 hours for that one. All right. Yep. So we'll leave it there, guys. Thanks for tuning in. This is Jason signing off. I'm here with Scott and Kirk, and we'll talk to you guys next time.